We begin the day with Mother Nature herself, now part of the Russian attack on Ukraine. When the invasion began back in February, spring and summer and a quick end to the war dominated talks here in Europe and in the United States. With December about to begin, the hopes have fallen along with the temperatures. Hopes for a quick end to winter are what we're talking about now. Snow is already falling across Ukraine just as Russian rockets rain down, destroying power and heating facilities. Russian President Vladimir Putin using weather as a weapon. And Ukraine's allies have announced a retaliation plan. More money in addition to more shipments of weapons. Here's the head of NATO speaking today.
Russia is using brutal missile and drone attacks to leave Ukraine cold and dark this winter. President Putin is trying to weaponize winter, to force Ukrainians to freeze or flee. NATO allies are providing unprecedented support. And today, allies made additional pledges to NATO's comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine.
Freeze or flee. DW correspondent Nick Connolly, he is in Kyiv. He has more on what Ukraine wants from this NATO meeting.
Well, the foreign minister here, Dmytro Kuleba, put it very briefly. Clearly, he said two things: transformers and Patriot missiles. So that's transformers, part of the key kind of crucial kit to make sure that Ukraine's grid survives. We don't really have a power generation problem. There's still enough electricity being produced, but the big problem is bringing it to people who need it. That network has been attacked time and time again over the last 6 to 8 weeks by the Russians, and that's proving to be the real kind of crucial point now, making sure that Ukraine has the capacity to keep on rebuilding. Right now, we've heard from the authorities here that they basically have run out of spare parts, and any new repairs to the system are basically 100% dependent on kit coming from outside, and it's very difficult to get that kit on the open market right now because everyone is trying to get that equipment, and Ukraine is hoovering up everything it can find. And the Patriot missiles, that is NATO's basically most sophisticated air defense system that so far hasn't been sent to Ukraine, that lots of NATO countries have said is too complex for Ukraine, would require too much training. But the Ukrainians would counter to that they have proven time and time again that they are able to pick up new tech, get to grips with it much faster than anyone predicted. And they say basically that's the only thing that will keep Ukrainian skies safe and will actually make it worthwhile rebuilding the infrastructure. Without that air defense component, they say it's basically pointless trying to keep things going here, because as soon as they repair anything, the Russians will be back with a further strike.
That was DW's Nick Connolly reporting from Kyiv. I want to pull in now Brad Bowman. He's the Senior Director for the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. He joins me tonight from Washington, D.C. It's good to see you again, Brad. We heard there from the Secretary General at NATO saying that Putin is weaponizing winter. We know that you can't fire missiles at Mother Nature, but Ukraine could fire more missiles to defend its own airspace from Russian strikes. Is that where we're headed?
Thanks for the opportunity to join you. Thanks for the question. Yeah, there's no doubt, Putin has used food as a weapon of war, and now he's using winter. I think the NATO Secretary General said it right. He wants Ukrainians without water, without electricity, without heat, and without light to try to demoralize them, to break their will, so they stop defending their homes against this unprovoked invasion. And I think it's in NATO's interests and the interests of all free people everywhere to help Ukraine and ensure Putin is not successful. And I think there's 3 ways to do that. One is to listen to the Ukrainians and get them what they're asking for. And what they're asking for is more air and missile defense capabilities. We've delivered a lot. We've committed to delivering more. We need to honor those commitments and get them there ASAP. We also need to listen to their needs for ground warfare, right? Because the more we can support the Ukrainians in their ground offensives, the more that will force Russia to divert its finite strike assets to the front lines rather than Ukrainian infrastructure, electrical infrastructure. And then finally, obviously, the generators and transformers and things like that will help. I would note in the November 23rd announcement, the Pentagon announced we're sending 200 generators. That's great, but it's a drop in the bucket. And I'm hopeful that our European allies will come alongside as well and continue to send more equipment like that.
And if anyone has any questions about what's actually happening on the battlefields, I mean, the statistics coming out are incredible. The amount of artillery shells being used now is the highest seen in Europe since the Second World War. Ukraine is using weapons shipped mainly from the United States. And you warned on this program last summer that the U.S. does not have an infinite supply in weapons reserves. Are we about to crash into a wall here in the United States?
You know, my research tells me that some of our arsenals, some of our munition supplies, some of our weapon supplies are in better shape than others. We're taking risk in a lot of areas. I think we're always taking risks. We're taking more risks than usual. We have to balance this, as the United States is concerned, against other requirements, including requirements in the Taiwan Strait, contingencies related to North Korea and even Iran. But yeah, I do believe the United States is in the midst of what I would call a munitions production capacity crisis. So we've seen about 26 of these drawdowns where we literally have taken 26 since August of 21, taken equipment from our own stores and sent them to Ukraine. I've supported doing that, but we've got to continue to watch this. But most importantly, we have to stop procuring these munitions at the minimal possible rate because of insufficient funding. And we need to ask any defense supplier in the United States and frankly Europe, what is the maximum you could do now? Please give us that. And what do you need to double or triple that next year? I think we need to be doing that for our own sake, for Ukraine's sake, and from the United States perspective also to ensure that we have what's necessary to deter aggression in the Taiwan Strait.
Well, Brett, I mean, maybe for our viewers, you have insight into how this works at the Pentagon, but also on Capitol Hill. Why is this not happening in the U.S.? If the U.S. can't deliver lots of weapons, then who can?
Well, I would respectfully say we have delivered an extraordinary amount. I'm incredibly proud of what the United States has done since February 24th. $19.7 billion in security assistance since the beginning of the Biden administration. I would say Ukraine would be fundamentally different than it is today if it weren't for the support America's provided. But I take the impetus behind your question. The answer is, I would say insufficient defense spending, and a lot of people will immediately dismiss that as some defense hawk. But, if you look at the percentage of GDP that we're spending on defense in the United States, we're near post-World War II lows. If you look at a percentage of federal spending, we're near post-World War II lows. America is not in danger of going bankrupt because of defense spending. We have problems because of entitlement spending. And we were able to get away with that for a long, long time before February 24th because we were engaged in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that we could sustain. But when you combine what's happening in Ukraine, trying to help Ukraine defend against this invasion, conducting the largest modernization effort in 40 years, and preparing to deter aggression at Taiwan Strait, there's just a massive mismatch between the defense industrial base we have and the one that we need. We're waking up, but as usual, Americans were waking up belatedly.
There are reports, I saw reports this week that weapons deliveries to Taiwan are now behind schedule for this year in amounts billions of dollars behind schedule. Is defending Ukraine, is it leaving Taiwan suddenly very vulnerable to a Chinese invasion?
I don't believe an invasion of Taiwan is imminent. I do worry that we could see something before 2027. If you look at the recent party Congress, it's clear that they're expediting their preparations. The Pentagon just released their annual report on the Chinese military today. There's lots to be concerned in there about it. They specifically said they're intensifying and accelerating their modernization efforts. They have the largest Navy in the world, an Air Force that's increasingly just as good as our own. And the PLA rocket force, they launched 135 ballistic missiles in 2021 alone for training and testing. That's more than the rest of the world combined. So we got our hands full in Taiwan. The problem is, and we're trying to get Taiwan the arms it needs to make itself a porcupine, as we've talked about before. But take the Harpoon missile, for example. We said that we announced in 2020 we were going to send that to Taiwan. We're not going to complete that shipment till 2028. It might be over by then.
Well, that's a sobering statistic as well. Brad Bowman, as always, we appreciate you putting all of this into context for us. Valuable insight. Thank you.
Thank you.